What my son's wife Amanda didn't know when she told our entire extended family that I was suffering from dementia and needed to be gently managed because she says inappropriate things and makes up stories was that I had spent the last 12 years quietly documenting every lie she told, every scheme she orchestrated, and every manipulation she used to isolate my son from his family. And this time, I was going to use every piece of evidence I'd carefully collected to show everyone that the woman they trusted to protect them from my supposed confusion was actually a calculating sociopath who had been systematically destroyed. Before I tell you how a supposedly confused 74-year-old grandmother used crystal-clear thinking and meticulous record-keeping to expose the most devastating family deception in 3 generations, tell me in the comments if you've ever been falsely accused of something that damaged your reputation. And if this story of methodical vindication resonates with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I have another incredible story about why you should never underestimate someone based on their age or appearance. My name is Margaret Maggie O'Sullivan. I'm 74 years old, and I'm about to tell you how my manipulative daughter-in-law, Amanda Pierce, a woman who had spent 8 years convincing my family that I was losing my mental faculties and could no longer be trusted with important family matters, made the catastrophic mistake of publicly humiliating someone who had been quietly building the most comprehensive documentation of lies, manipulation, and systematic family destruction that anyone could imagine. What Amanda Pierce didn't understand when she stood up at my grandson's college graduation party and announced to 50 family members and friends that I was struggling with memory issues and that everyone should take what Grandma Maggie says with a grain of salt because she gets confused about details and sometimes makes up stories, was that the woman she was dismissing as a declining elderly relative had actually spent the previous 8 years maintaining detailed written records of every lie she told, every manipulation she orchestrated, and every cruel scheme she used to isolate my son from his family and destroy the relationships that had taken. Amanda thought she was protecting herself by convincing everyone that I was unreliable and confused, but she was actually creating the perfect conditions for her own destruction. While she was busy telling family members that my stories were just confused ramblings from someone whose memory isn't what it used to be, I was documenting every conversation, photographing every piece of evidence, and building a case so comprehensive and devastating that when the truth finally came out, there would be no room for doubt, denial, or explanation. The woman who had spent 8 years systematically undermining my credibility and reputation was about to discover that she had been tangling with someone whose mind was not only sharp as a tack, but who possessed the investigative skills, organizational abilities, and ruthless determination necessary to destroy her carefully constructed web of lies in the most public and humiliating way possible. But to understand how Amanda Pierce's campaign to discredit me would result in the complete exposure of her true character and the restoration of my reputation within the family, you need to understand exactly who Margaret O'Sullivan really was beneath the gentle grandmother facade that Amanda had used to convince everyone I was losing my grip on reality. When people look at me today, they see exactly what Amanda had trained them to see: a petite 74-year-old woman with soft, silver hair that I curl myself every Thursday morning at Murphy's Beauty Salon on Oak Street, where I've been going for the past 15 years since my husband Patrick and I moved to Millfield to be closer to our children and grandchildren. They see someone who wears comfortable cardigans in soft colors from the Macy's clearance rack, practical walking shoes from Comfort Plus, and the kind of simple gold jewelry that suggests traditional values and modest means. My appearance reinforces every stereotype about elderly Irish-American women in small New England towns. I drive a 10-year-old Honda CR-V with a proud Grammy bumper sticker and a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror that belonged to my mother. My handbag is a practical black leather purse that I've carried for 6 years, containing reading glasses, peppermint candies, wallet photos of my 12 grandchildren, and a small notebook where I write down grocery lists, appointment reminders, and, as Amanda would soon discover, detailed observations about family interactions and conversations. When I walk into a room, people instinctively speak to me in the gentle, slightly louder tone that many use with elderly relatives, assuming that my age automatically implies hearing problems or cognitive decline. Store clerks ask if I need help reading labels or finding items. Restaurant servers automatically suggest the senior menu and ask if I need assistance with technology like payment tablets. Medical receptionists speak slowly and clearly, as if my Irish accent combined with my age means I might have trouble understanding instructions. But what people don't see when they look at Margaret O'Sullivan is someone who spent 30 years working as a medical office administrator for Dr. Harold Brennan's family practice, managing patient records, insurance claims, appointment scheduling, and the complex documentation requirements that keep a medical practice running smoothly and legally compliant. They don't see someone who developed extraordinary attention to detail, systematic record-keeping skills, and the ability to spot inconsistencies, discrepancies, and patterns that others might miss. My work in Dr. Brennan's office had required me to maintain confidential patient information, track complex medical histories, coordinate with insurance companies and specialists, and ensure that every detail was documented accurately and completely. I had learned to listen carefully to what people said, observe what they did, and notice when their words didn't match their actions, or when their stories changed over time. These skills had made me an invaluable employee and had earned me the respect and trust of both patients and medical professionals. But perhaps more importantly, my work had taught me the critical importance of documentation and evidence when dealing with people who might lie, exaggerate, or misrepresent information for their own benefit. I had seen insurance fraud, prescription drug seeking, and various forms of medical deception, and I had learned that the best protection against false accusations or manipulation was comprehensive, organized, and irrefutable documentation. When I retired at age 65, I had brought these professional skills and instincts with me into my personal life, though I had never expected to need them for dealing with family relationships. But Amanda Pierce's systematic campaign to discredit me had triggered every investigative instinct I possessed, and I had responded by applying the same rigorous documentation standards to family interactions that I had once applied to medical records and insurance claims. The result was a collection of evidence so detailed and comprehensive that it would have impressed any private investigator, attorney, or law enforcement officer. But because Amanda had convinced everyone that I was becoming confused and unreliable, no one had suspected that the gentle grandmother they saw knitting sweaters and baking cookies was actually conducting the most thorough investigation of family deception in O'Sullivan history. My background had also provided me with something that Amanda had seriously underestimated: a comprehensive understanding of human psychology and the ability to read people's motivations, insecurities, and behavioral patterns with remarkable accuracy. 30 years of dealing with patients who were frightened, stressed, or trying to hide embarrassing medical conditions had taught me how to recognize the signs of deception, manipulation, and emotional instability. I could tell when someone was lying about their symptoms to get stronger medication. I could spot patients who were exaggerating injuries for insurance purposes. I could identify people who were hiding important medical information because they were embarrassed or afraid. And I could recognize the behavioral patterns that indicated when someone was manipulating family members or medical staff to get what they wanted. These psychological insights had made me an extremely effective medical administrator, but they had also given me the tools necessary to understand exactly what Amanda Pierce was doing to our family and why her strategies were so effective with people who didn't recognize manipulation when they saw it. Amanda's approach to family manipulation was actually quite sophisticated and strategic, but it followed predictable patterns that someone with my background could easily identify and counter. She used a combination of false concern, strategic information sharing, and gradual credibility undermining that would have been effective against most elderly family members. But she had chosen the wrong target for her deception campaign. The woman she thought she could easily discredit as a confused elderly relative was actually someone who understood manipulation better than she did, who possessed the skills and experience necessary to document her lies systematically, and who had the patience and determination to build a case so comprehensive that when it was finally revealed, there would be no possibility of denial or escape. But Amanda's most serious mistake was her complete failure to understand that the very qualities she was exploiting, my age, my traditional appearance, and my gentle demeanor, were actually advantages that allowed me to observe and document her behavior without arousing her suspicion. She saw an elderly woman who could be easily dismissed and discredited, but she was actually dealing with someone who had spent decades developing exactly the skills necessary to expose and defeat her type of manipulation. My grandson Tommy's college graduation party had been the perfect setting for Amanda to make her most devastating mistake, because she had felt confident enough in her 8-year campaign of credibility destruction to publicly announce that I was unreliable and couldn't be trusted. But what she didn't realize was that her public declaration of my supposed mental decline was actually the moment when I decided that protecting her from the consequences of her own behavior was no longer worth the personal cost of allowing my reputation and relationships to be destroyed. The gentle grandmother who had been patiently enduring 8 years of systematic credibility assault was about to reveal that she possessed not only perfect mental clarity, but also the evidence and documentation necessary to destroy everything Amanda had built through lies and manipulation. Amanda Pierce was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks like they couldn't possibly hurt you, and that publicly humiliating someone based on false assumptions about their capabilities can have consequences that extend far beyond hurt feelings. The woman she had dismissed as a confused elderly relative was actually a retired medical administrator with investigative skills, comprehensive documentation, and the moral authority necessary to expose the truth in ways that would be impossible to deny or dismiss. Amanda's 8-year campaign to convince everyone that I was losing my mental faculties was about to backfire in the most spectacular and devastating way possible. The truth was coming to the O'Sullivan family, and it was going to be delivered by someone who had spent 8 years being systematically underestimated, while quietly building the case that would restore her reputation and destroy the woman who had worked so hard to damage it. Justice was coming to Amanda Pierce, and it was going to be more thorough, more public, and more devastating than she could have ever imagined. The grandmother she thought she had successfully discredited was about to demonstrate exactly what happened when someone underestimated the wrong person for too long. The stage was set for the most comprehensive family vindication in 3 generations of O'Sullivan history, and Amanda Pierce was about to discover that her 8-year campaign of lies and manipulation had been building toward exactly the kind of public exposure and humiliation that would end her influence in our family forever. The woman who had spent nearly a decade convincing everyone that I couldn't be trusted was about to learn that I was the one person in the family who could be trusted to tell the truth, document the evidence, and deliver the justice that had been delayed for far too long. Margaret O'Sullivan was about to remind everyone why you should never underestimate someone based on their age, appearance, or the lies that other people tell about them. The real story was finally going to be told, and it was going to change everything. To understand how Amanda Pierce's systematic campaign to destroy my credibility would ultimately lead to her own complete downfall, you need to understand exactly how the stereotypes and assumptions about elderly women had worked in her favor for 8 years, and how those same assumptions had given me the perfect cover to build the most comprehensive case of documented family deception that anyone could imagine. When I tell people that I'm 74 years old and worked for 30 years as a medical office administrator, they automatically make certain assumptions about who I am and what I'm capable of. They picture someone who answered phones, scheduled appointments, and filed paperwork, essentially a glorified secretary who handled the simple administrative tasks that kept a doctor's office running. They don't understand that managing a successful medical practice requires the organizational skills of a corporate executive, the investigative abilities of a detective, and the psychological insight of a trained counselor. Dr. Harold Brennan's family practice served over 3,000 patients across 3 decades, and I was responsible for maintaining accurate, complete, and legally compliant records for every single one of them. This meant tracking complex medical histories, coordinating care between multiple specialists, managing insurance authorizations and appeals, ensuring proper medication dosing and interaction monitoring, and maintaining the detailed documentation required for legal protection and quality care standards. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of my job was dealing with the human element. Patients who were frightened, confused, angry, or desperate, and who sometimes tried to manipulate the system to get what they wanted rather than what they actually needed. I learned to recognize when someone was exaggerating symptoms to get stronger pain medication, when they were minimizing serious conditions because they were afraid of the implications, when they were lying about compliance with treatment plans, and when they were hiding important information that could affect their care. Working in healthcare for 3 decades taught me that people lie for many different reasons: fear, embarrassment, desperation, or simple selfishness, but that the truth always emerges eventually through careful observation, systematic documentation, and patient investigation. I learned that the most dangerous liars were often the most charming and convincing ones, and that the best protection against manipulation was maintaining detailed, objective records that couldn't be disputed or reinterpreted. These skills had served me well in the medical field, but I had never expected to need them in my personal life until Amanda Pierce married my son Daniel and began her systematic campaign to isolate him from his family by convincing everyone that I was becoming mentally unreliable and couldn't be trusted with important family information. The first indication that Amanda was going to be a problem came during her engagement to Daniel, when she began making subtle comments about generational differences and the importance of establishing healthy boundaries with extended family members. The comments were always framed as general observations about modern relationships rather than specific criticisms of our family, but I recognized the pattern immediately from my work experience. I had seen this approach many times from patients who wanted to change their treatment plans or medication regimens, but didn't want to directly challenge their doctor's expertise. They would make general comments about outdated approaches or newer methods that other doctors were using, rather than directly stating that they disagreed with their current care. The strategy was designed to plant seeds of doubt without creating direct confrontation. Amanda's engagement period comments followed the same pattern. She would express appreciation for our family's closeness while suggesting that some families might benefit from more contemporary approaches to relationships. She would praise our traditions while mentioning that younger generations often prefer different ways of staying connected. She would acknowledge my role in the family while observing that modern families sometimes handled things differently than previous generations. The comments were subtle enough that most family members didn't recognize them as criticism, but my professional experience had taught me to pay attention to patterns of communication that suggested someone was trying to change existing arrangements without taking responsibility for their preferences or criticisms. Amanda was laying the groundwork for future challenges to our family dynamics, while maintaining plausible deniability about her true intentions. But what really triggered my investigative instincts was Amanda's approach to gathering information about family members during her engagement period. She would ask seemingly innocent questions about family history, relationships, and personal details that went far beyond normal curiosity about her future husband's background. She wanted to know about family conflicts, financial situations, health problems, and personal struggles that wouldn't normally be relevant to someone who was simply trying to understand her fiancé's family culture. The questioning pattern reminded me of insurance investigators who were looking for reasons to deny claims or reduce coverage. They would ask broad, seemingly innocent questions while actually fishing for specific information that could be used to challenge or undermine legitimate requests for benefits. Amanda's questions about our family had the same quality: too systematic, too comprehensive, and too focused on potential vulnerabilities to be casual curiosity. But the most concerning aspect of Amanda's early behavior was her obvious pleasure when she learned about family problems, conflicts, or embarrassing situations. Most people who care about their future spouse's family respond to information about difficulties with sympathy, concern, or offers of support. Amanda's response was different. She seemed energized by learning about family weaknesses and would ask follow-up questions that suggested she was cataloging information for future use, rather than trying to understand how she could be helpful or supportive. I recognized this pattern from dealing with patients who were building cases for medical malpractice lawsuits or insurance fraud. They would gather information systematically, focus on potential problems or failures, and respond to negative information with the kind of intense interest that suggested they were planning to use it against the people they were supposedly trying to help. My professional instincts told me that Amanda Pierce was not someone who could be trusted with sensitive family information, but I also understood that expressing concerns about her character during the engagement period would likely backfire and create exactly the kind of family conflict that she could use to justify her future campaigns against me. Instead, I decided to begin documenting her behavior and statements in the same systematic way that I had once documented patient interactions and insurance communications. This decision to begin maintaining records of Amanda's behavior was the most important strategic choice I made during the entire 8-year period of her campaign against me. While she was busy gathering information about our family's vulnerabilities, I was gathering information about her strategies, lies, and manipulative behavior. While she was building her case for why I couldn't be trusted, I was building a case for why she couldn't be trusted. The documentation process I established was based on the same principles I had used for 30 years in medical record keeping: accuracy, completeness, objectivity, and legal defensibility. Every interaction with Amanda was recorded with date, time, location, witnesses present, and exact quotes when possible. Every statement she made about family members was documented with context and supporting evidence. Every lie, contradiction, or manipulation was carefully noted with cross-references to previous statements and actions. But perhaps most importantly, I began photographing and saving physical evidence of Amanda's deceptions. Text messages, emails, social media posts, and other documentation that could prove the difference between what she said privately and what she said publicly about family members and situations. This evidence collection was crucial because Amanda's manipulation strategy depended on people not being able to compare her different versions of events or track the evolution of her lies over time. The systematic documentation of Amanda's behavior served two critical purposes. It provided me with objective evidence that could refute her lies and manipulations, and it helped me understand her strategic patterns so that I could predict and counter her future moves. After 6 months of careful observation and record-keeping, I had identified the specific techniques she used to isolate family members, discredit potential threats to her influence, and maintain control over information and communication. Amanda's primary strategy was what I came to think of as credibility warfare, a systematic campaign to establish herself as the reliable source of information about family matters, while simultaneously undermining other family members' trustworthiness and communication abilities. She would position herself as the family member who really understood what was happening, who could be trusted to handle sensitive situations appropriately, and who had the modern perspective necessary to help the family navigate contemporary challenges. At the same time, she would begin planting seeds of doubt about other family members' reliability, mental clarity, and ability to handle important family responsibilities. The process was gradual and subtle, designed to shift family dynamics without creating obvious conflict or resistance. But it was also systematic and strategic, with clear goals and measurable progress toward isolating specific family members and establishing Amanda as the central authority for family decision-making. My professional experience had taught me that the most effective way to counter this type of manipulation was to maintain superior documentation and evidence, while allowing the manipulator to believe their strategy was working. Amanda needed to feel confident enough in her campaign to make increasingly bold and obvious moves that would eventually expose her true character to family members who might not recognize subtle manipulation, but would definitely recognize overt cruelty and deception. This meant that I had to endure 8 years of systematic credibility assault while maintaining perfect documentation and waiting for Amanda to become overconfident enough to make the kind of public, undeniable mistake that would give me the opening I needed to expose her entire campaign of lies and manipulation. The patience required for this strategy was extraordinary, but my professional background had taught me that the most important cases often took years to develop, and that rushing to confrontation before having overwhelming evidence usually resulted in failure and increased problems. I knew that Amanda's personality type would eventually lead her to overreach, and that when she did, I needed to be ready with documentation so comprehensive that there would be no possibility of denial, explanation, or successful counterattack. The woman that family members saw during those 8 years, a grandmother who seemed to be gradually losing her mental sharpness and becoming confused about details, was actually someone who was maintaining the most detailed and accurate records of family interactions that anyone could imagine. My supposed decline was the perfect cover for the most sophisticated investigation and evidence-gathering operation that our family had ever seen. Amanda Pierce thought she was successfully discrediting a harmless elderly woman who lacked the skills and resources to defend herself against systematic manipulation. She was actually creating a comprehensive record of her own deception and cruelty that would eventually be used to destroy her credibility and influence within our family completely and permanently. The grandmother she had been systematically undermining for 8 years was about to demonstrate exactly why you should never underestimate someone based on their age, appearance, or the lies that other people tell about their capabilities. The real Margaret O'Sullivan was about to emerge, and Amanda Pierce was going to discover that she had been playing a game where her opponent had been following completely different rules than she understood. The truth was coming, And it was going to be more devastating than Amanda could have ever imagined. To understand how Amanda Pierce's systematic campaign to destroy my reputation would ultimately result in her own complete destruction, you need to understand exactly who Amanda Catherine Pierce really was beneath the caring daughter-in-law facade she had perfected over 8 years of marriage to my son Daniel. Because the woman my family had learned to trust and rely upon was actually one of the most calculating, manipulative, and emotionally dangerous people I had ever encountered in 30 years of dealing with deceptive patients and insurance fraudsters. Amanda Catherine Pierce was born in November 1985 in Westport, Connecticut, the only child of Richard Pierce, a successful corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions, and Catherine Pierce, who had built a thriving interior design business catering to wealthy families throughout Fairfield County. From her earliest memories, Amanda's life had been defined by the constant pressure to maintain appearances, achieve perfection in all endeavors, and represent the family's success through her behavior, accomplishments, and strategic social connections. Unlike many children who develop their sense of self through genuine relationships, creative exploration, and authentic emotional experiences, Amanda's childhood had been structured around performance, image management, and the systematic cultivation of advantages that would serve her long-term goals for social and financial advancement. Her parents' success in competitive professional fields had taught them that achievement required not just talent and hard work, but also the ability to manipulate perceptions, control information, and exploit other people's weaknesses for strategic advantage. The Pierce family lived in a meticulously maintained colonial-style home in an exclusive neighborhood where every detail of their lifestyle was carefully chosen to project success, sophistication, and cultural refinement. Amanda's childhood bedroom was featured in Connecticut Magazine when she was 14, showcasing her parents' ability to create spaces that were both beautiful and strategically impressive for the kind of people who could advance their professional and social interests. But beneath the magazine-worthy exterior, Amanda's upbringing was characterized by relentless pressure to excel academically, socially, and personally in ways that would enhance the family's reputation and create opportunities for continued advancement within Connecticut's competitive upper-middle-class society. Her parents monitored her grades, friendships, extracurricular activities, and even her appearance with the kind of detailed attention that most families reserved for business ventures or investment portfolios. Amanda's academic performance was tracked and analyzed like a stock portfolio, with her parents hiring tutors, educational consultants, and test preparation specialists to ensure that she maintained the kind of academic excellence that would guarantee admission to prestigious universities and access to elite social circles. Her social activities were carefully curated to ensure that she associated with children from families that could provide valuable connections and opportunities for future advancement. Even Amanda's hobbies and interests were evaluated based on their potential to enhance her college applications and social standing rather than on her genuine enthusiasm or natural abilities. She was enrolled in classical piano lessons not because she showed musical talent or interest, but because musical training was considered essential for well-rounded, sophisticated young women from successful families. She participated in competitive equestrian events not because she loved horses, but because equestrian skills were associated with upper-class culture and would distinguish her from children whose families couldn't afford such expensive activities. This approach to childhood and adolescence created a young woman who was exceptionally skilled at identifying and meeting external expectations, but who had never developed a genuine sense of personal identity, authentic relationships, or emotional connection to other people's welfare and happiness. Amanda learned to evaluate every situation, relationship, and opportunity based on how it might affect her image and social standing, rather than how it might contribute to her personal growth, emotional fulfillment, or genuine happiness. The psychological foundation that would define Amanda's entire approach to adult relationships was her learned belief that love, acceptance, and security were conditional on performance and image, rather than on genuine connection, mutual support, and authentic emotional intimacy. She had internalized the message that her worth was determined by how well she could represent success, sophistication, and perfection to the outside world, and that relationships were strategic alliances designed to advance mutual interests rather than emotional connections based on care, trust, and genuine affection. During high school, Amanda's performance-based approach to relationships became increasingly sophisticated and calculating. She would maintain friendships with people who enhanced her social status, while systematically distancing herself from anyone who might be considered less desirable or potentially embarrassing to her reputation. She would participate in activities that looked impressive on college applications, rather than pursuing genuine interests or developing authentic passions and talents. Amanda's approach to dating during high school and college was particularly revealing of her transactional mindset and strategic approach to relationship building. She would evaluate potential romantic partners based on their academic achievements, family backgrounds, social connections, and future earning potential, rather than on compatibility, shared values, emotional connection, or genuine attraction and affection. She understood intuitively that choosing the right romantic partner was one of the most important strategic decisions she could make for her long-term success and social advancement, and she approached dating with the same systematic analysis that her parents had taught her to apply to academic and career planning. Romance was a means to an end rather than an end in itself, and emotional connection was less important than strategic advantage and mutual benefit. The strategy worked exactly as Amanda had planned throughout her academic career. She graduated from Fairfield University with a degree in communications and a minor in psychology, achievements that reflected her focus on developing skills that would be useful for managing relationships and social dynamics, rather than building expertise in any particular field or developing genuine intellectual interests and capabilities. Her academic record was impressive enough to open doors to good entry-level positions in corporate communications and public relations, but not so specialized that it would limit her options for adapting to whatever opportunities might arise through marriage and social connections. Amanda understood that her most valuable asset was her ability to present different versions of herself, depending on what seemed most likely to appeal to different audiences and serve her strategic goals. But perhaps more importantly, Amanda's college experience had provided her with extensive practice in the kind of social manipulation and relationship management that would be essential for achieving her long-term goals for marriage, family life, and social advancement. She had learned to present different personalities and value systems depending on what seemed most likely to appeal to different audiences, and she had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify and exploit other people's insecurities, desires, and emotional vulnerabilities. After graduation, Amanda had moved to Boston specifically because she had identified New England as a region where an attractive, well-educated young woman could build a successful career, while also positioning herself to meet and marry someone from a stable, traditional family that would provide the foundation for the kind of respectable, comfortable lifestyle she wanted to create for herself and her future children. Boston's combination of educational institutions, healthcare organizations, and established family businesses appealed to Amanda's sense of what constituted the ideal environment for someone with her ambitions and strategic approach to relationship building. The city offered enough professional opportunities to maintain her independence and career development, while also providing access to the kind of established, traditional families that would value her apparent commitment to family relationships and conventional approaches to marriage and motherhood. Amanda's first job in Boston was as a communications coordinator for a mid-sized healthcare consulting firm, a position that allowed her to observe successful professionals and learn about the social dynamics that governed advancement in corporate environments. She was particularly interested in understanding how successful women managed their careers, relationships, and public images to achieve the kind of lifestyle and social standing that she wanted for herself and her future family. But Amanda's real education during this period came from her careful observation of her colleagues' marriages and family relationships. She studied how successful women balanced career demands with family responsibilities, how they managed their children's education and social development, and how they used family activities and social connections to enhance their professional standing and community influence. The pattern that emerged from Amanda's systematic research was that the most successful women were those who had married men with strong earning potential and stable family backgrounds, and who had then used their roles as wives and mothers to build impressive family brands that enhanced everyone's reputation and created opportunities for continued social and professional advancement. These women understood that modern success required creating family images that projected achievement, sophistication, and values that would appeal to other successful families, while also maintaining the traditional elements that suggested stability, reliability, and genuine commitment to family relationships and community involvement. Amanda's analysis of successful Boston families revealed that the most impressive families were those that appeared to have achieved the perfect balance between traditional values and contemporary sophistication. They maintained close family relationships while also pursuing individual achievements and professional development. They honored their cultural heritage and family traditions while also embracing modern approaches to parenting, career development, and community involvement. This research provided Amanda with a clear template for the kind of family she wanted to create and the kind of man she needed to marry to achieve her goals for social advancement and long-term security. She was looking for someone who was financially successful, but not so wealthy that she would be overshadowed by his achievements or family background. She wanted someone who came from a stable, respectable family, but who would also be open to updating traditional approaches to family relationships and social activities. Most importantly, Amanda needed someone who would value the supportive, nurturing partnership that she had learned to project, while also providing her with the kind of social and financial foundation that would allow her to build the impressive family brand she had been planning since college. She needed a husband who would appreciate her apparent commitment to family relationships, while also giving her the freedom and resources to establish herself as the family's social coordinator and public representative. When Amanda met Daniel O'Sullivan at a professional networking event in March 2015, she recognized immediately that he represented exactly the kind of opportunity she had been preparing for throughout her 20s. Daniel was handsome, successful, and obviously from a stable family background that valued traditional relationships and authentic emotional connections. He worked as a project manager for a major construction company, earning a comfortable salary with excellent benefits and strong potential for advancement within a growing industry. But perhaps more importantly, Daniel seemed to represent the kind of genuine, caring man who would value the supportive traditional partnership that Amanda had learned to project, while also being open to the kind of family modernization and social advancement that she believed would benefit everyone involved. He talked about his family with obvious affection and respect, mentioning his mother's wisdom and his siblings' achievements in ways that suggested he came from the kind of close, traditional family that would provide the perfect foundation for building the impressive family brand she envisioned. Amanda's courtship strategy with Daniel was her most sophisticated performance to date, requiring her to maintain a complex persona that projected warmth, authenticity, and traditional values, while actually being completely focused on achieving her strategic goals for marriage, family building, and social advancement. She presented herself as someone who valued family relationships and traditional approaches to love and commitment, when in reality she was conducting a careful evaluation of Daniel's long-term potential as a partner in her family building and social advancement project. The deception required Amanda to develop extensive knowledge about Daniel's interests, values, and family background, so that she could present herself as someone who shared his priorities and would fit seamlessly into his existing relationships, while also contributing fresh perspectives and contemporary insights that would enhance the family's social standing and future opportunities. But beneath Amanda's carefully constructed performance of warmth and authenticity, she was actually conducting her own investigation into Daniel's financial situation, family dynamics, and potential for advancement within his chosen career field. She analyzed his earning potential, researched his company's growth prospects, and even made subtle inquiries about his family's financial stability and potential inheritance opportunities. This background research revealed that Daniel earned approximately $75,000 annually as a project manager, with a 401k account, health insurance, and other benefits that suggested financial responsibility and long-term career stability. His family owned a modest but well-maintained home in a respectable neighborhood, and his siblings had all achieved middle-class success through education, hard work, and mutual family support. While Daniel's financial situation was comfortable rather than luxurious, Amanda's research had also revealed that his family represented exactly the kind of stable, traditional foundation that could provide the perfect platform for her family-building ambitions and social advancement goals. The O'Sullivan family's reputation for integrity, their strong community connections, and their obvious commitment to supporting each other's success suggested that marrying into this family would provide Amanda with the kind of social capital and emotional security that money alone couldn't purchase. But the most valuable aspect of the O'Sullivan family from Amanda's strategic perspective was their obvious respect for traditional family relationships and their apparent willingness to welcome and support new family members who demonstrated genuine commitment to family values and mutual support. This suggested that Amanda could establish herself as a valued family member, while also gradually introducing the kind of updates and improvements that would enhance everyone's social standing and future opportunities. The contradiction between Amanda's stated values and her actual approach to relationships was most evident during their engagement period, when she began to reveal her true priorities and expectations for their future together, while maintaining the pretense of commitment to traditional family values and authentic emotional connection. While Amanda continued to express appreciation for Daniel's family and their traditions, she also began to suggest ways that those traditions might be updated or enhanced to better reflect contemporary approaches to family relationships and social activities. The suggestions were always framed as helpful improvements rather than criticisms, but they revealed her fundamental belief that the O'Sullivan family's traditional approaches to relationships and celebrations were outdated and potentially limiting to everyone's social and professional advancement. Amanda's suggestions were subtle but persistent, focusing on ways that family gatherings could be made more sophisticated and contemporary through professional planning, updated approaches to entertainment, and more strategic guest lists that would create better networking opportunities and enhance the family's social reputation within the community. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of Amanda's approach was her systematic analysis of family members and their potential value or threat to her goals for family modernization and social advancement. She quickly identified me as the family member who would be most resistant to her planned changes and most capable of exposing the gap between her public persona and her private motivations and character flaws. My role as the family's emotional anchor and informal coordinator meant that I had comprehensive knowledge of family dynamics, extensive influence over family decisions, and the kind of moral authority that could effectively challenge Amanda's credibility if I ever decided that her influence was harmful to family relationships and individual welfare. Amanda understood instinctively that her success in establishing herself as the family's new social coordinator and decision-making authority would require either winning my support and cooperation or systematically undermining my influence and credibility within the family structure. Since my traditional values and authentic commitment to family relationships made it unlikely that I would support her modernization agenda, Amanda chose the more dangerous but potentially more effective strategy of gradually discrediting me and establishing herself as the family's more reliable and contemporary source of guidance and leadership. This decision to target me for systematic credibility destruction was the most serious strategic mistake Amanda made during her 8-year campaign to establish control over O'Sullivan family dynamics and social activities. She was choosing to attack the family member who possessed the greatest knowledge of family history and relationships, the strongest moral authority and community reputation, and, as she would eventually discover, the most sophisticated skills for documenting evidence and building cases against people who threatened family welfare and individual security. But Amanda's most serious character flaw, the one that would ultimately lead to her complete destruction, was her absolute inability to form genuine emotional connections with other people, or to understand that her manipulative behavior was causing real pain and damage to people who had done nothing to deserve her systematic cruelty. Amanda viewed other people as either assets to be cultivated or obstacles to be removed, and she seemed genuinely incapable of understanding that family relationships were supposed to be based on love, trust, and mutual support, rather than strategic advantage and social positioning. This emotional deficiency was most evident in her treatment of Daniel throughout their marriage, as she gradually isolated him from family relationships and community connections that had been central to his identity and happiness for his entire life. Amanda's strategy was to convince Daniel that his family's traditional approaches to relationships were actually holding him back from achieving his full potential, and that their close family connections were preventing him from developing the kind of independence and professional focus that would lead to greater success and social advancement. The manipulation was subtle but relentless, with Amanda constantly suggesting that Daniel's family was too involved in his personal decisions, and that their emotional closeness was unhealthy, compared to more contemporary approaches to family relationships. She would express concern about his dependence on family support and advice, suggesting that successful modern men should be more self-reliant and less influenced by outdated family traditions and expectations. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of Amanda's manipulation of Daniel was her systematic campaign to convince him that I was becoming mentally unreliable and that my influence on family decisions was potentially harmful to everyone's welfare and future security. She began by expressing gentle concern about my memory and cognitive abilities, suggesting that I sometimes seemed confused about details or mixed up about important family information. The campaign started with small, seemingly innocent observations about my behavior during family gatherings. Amanda would mention to Daniel that I had repeated the same story twice during dinner, or that I seemed a little confused about dates or names. She would express loving concern about my well-being, while simultaneously planting seeds of doubt about my mental acuity and reliability as a source of family guidance and decision-making input. The genius of Amanda's approach was that she framed her systematic destruction of my credibility as caring concern for my welfare and the family's protection. She positioned herself as the family member who was brave enough to acknowledge the difficult reality that I was experiencing age-related cognitive decline, and who was willing to take responsibility for gently managing my involvement in family activities to prevent embarrassment or confusion. This strategy was particularly effective because it exploited the family's genuine love and concern for my well-being, while also establishing Amanda as the responsible, caring family member who could be trusted to handle sensitive situations with appropriate discretion and modern understanding of elderly care issues. She transformed what should have been recognized as systematic emotional abuse into what appeared to be thoughtful family protection and contemporary elder care management. But Amanda's manipulation extended far beyond her campaign against me, to include systematic efforts to control and limit Daniel's relationships with his siblings, his children from his previous marriage, and his longtime friends and professional associates. She would express concerns about the influence of various people in Daniel's life, suggesting that some relationships were draining his energy or holding him back from achieving his full potential. The pattern was always the same. Amanda would identify people who had genuine emotional connections with Daniel, or who possessed the knowledge and moral authority to recognize her manipulative behavior, and she would then begin a careful campaign to limit his contact with them, while positioning herself as his primary source of emotional support and practical guidance. She was particularly threatened by Daniel's close relationship with his brother Michael and his sister Sarah, both of whom had known Daniel since childhood, and who possessed the kind of intimate knowledge of his character and values that made it difficult for Amanda to completely reshape his identity and priorities according to her strategic goals. Amanda's approach to isolating Daniel from his siblings was to create subtle conflicts and misunderstandings that would make family gatherings uncomfortable and reduce his motivation to maintain close relationships with people who had been central to his emotional support system for his entire life. She would misinterpret innocent comments as criticism, take offense at harmless family jokes, and generally create an atmosphere of tension and awkwardness that made Daniel feel like he had to choose between maintaining family harmony and supporting his wife's comfort and emotional well-being. The most insidious aspect of Amanda's isolation strategy was her ability to make Daniel feel responsible for family conflicts that she had actually created through her own manipulative behavior and unreasonable demands for special treatment and accommodation. She would create situations where family members were forced to choose between confronting her inappropriate behavior and maintaining family peace, and then she would use their natural preference for avoiding conflict as evidence that they didn't really care about Daniel's happiness and marital success. Over the course of 8 years, Amanda's systematic manipulation had gradually transformed Daniel from a confident, outgoing man with strong family relationships and community connections into someone who was increasingly isolated, anxious, and dependent on Amanda's approval and guidance for basic decision-making and social interaction. The man who had once been the center of family gatherings and community activities had become withdrawn, defensive, and obviously uncomfortable in situations where he might face questions about his wife's behavior or pressure to maintain relationships that Amanda had convinced him were unhealthy or inappropriate. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of Amanda's systematic destruction of Daniel's identity and relationships was that she had convinced him that the isolation and anxiety he was experiencing were actually signs of personal growth and maturation, rather than symptoms of emotional abuse and manipulation. She had taught him to view his increasing dependence on her approval as evidence of their strong marital bond, rather than as the result of systematic psychological conditioning designed to eliminate his ability to seek support and guidance from other sources. This psychological control was so complete that Daniel had actually begun to repeat Amanda's criticisms of family members and to express concerns about my mental condition that were obviously based on her systematic campaign of lies and manipulation, rather than on his own observations or genuine worry about my well-being. The son who had once sought my advice and valued my perspective had been transformed into someone who apologized for my behavior and made excuses for Amanda's increasingly obvious disrespect and cruelty. Amanda's manipulation of Daniel was a textbook example of the kind of systematic emotional abuse that isolates victims from their support systems, while convincing them that the abuse is actually care, and that their isolation is actually growth and independence. She had used Daniel's love for his family and his desire to be a good husband as weapons against him, convincing him that protecting Amanda from family criticism and interference was his responsibility as a caring spouse. But Amanda's most serious strategic error was her complete failure to understand that her 8-year campaign of manipulation and abuse had been observed, documented, and analyzed by someone who possessed the professional skills and personal determination necessary to expose her behavior and restore the family relationships she had worked so hard to destroy. While Amanda had been busy convincing everyone that I was losing my mental faculties and couldn't be trusted with important family information, I had been maintaining comprehensive records of her lies, manipulations, and systematic family destruction that would eventually be used to reveal the truth about her character and restore justice to the O'Sullivan family. The woman who had spent 8 years positioning herself as the family's caring protector and modern voice of reason was about to be exposed as one of the most manipulative and emotionally dangerous people our family had ever encountered. Her carefully constructed facade of concern and sophistication was about to crumble, revealing the calculating sociopath who had been hiding beneath the performance of the perfect daughter-in-law. Amanda Pierce was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in a family is the one who looks like they're trying to help everyone, and that systematic emotional abuse has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate victims when the right person is paying attention and building a case for justice. The truth was coming to the O'Sullivan family, and Amanda Pierce was about to discover exactly what happened when someone underestimated the wrong grandmother for too long. To understand how Amanda Pierce's eventual public humiliation at my grandson's graduation party would shock our entire family, you need to understand the sophisticated performance she maintained during the first 2 years of her marriage to Daniel. Because the woman who would eventually stand up and announce that I was mentally unreliable had spent 24 months convincing everyone that she was not only the perfect daughter-in-law, but someone who genuinely valued my wisdom, respected my role in the family, and was committed to honoring the traditions and relationships that had held our family together for decades. Amanda's approach to establishing herself within the O'Sullivan family during her newlywed period was nothing short of masterful in its calculation and execution. She had clearly studied our family dynamics during her engagement and had developed a comprehensive strategy for winning the trust and affection of every family member, while simultaneously gathering the information and establishing the credibility that would later allow her to systematically destroy the relationships she was pretending to cherish. The performance began immediately after she and Daniel returned from their honeymoon in Ireland, a destination that Amanda had suggested because she claimed to be fascinated by Irish culture and eager to connect with Daniel's heritage in a meaningful way. The choice of Ireland for their honeymoon had been presented as evidence of Amanda's genuine interest in understanding and honoring our family's cultural background, but I recognized it immediately as a strategic decision designed to establish her credentials as someone who valued family history and traditions. Upon their return, Amanda had presented me with a beautiful Waterford crystal vase that she claimed to have chosen specifically because she, quote, wanted to bring something special back for the woman who raised such an amazing son. The gift was accompanied by a handwritten note expressing her gratitude for welcoming me into your family with such warmth and kindness, and her hope that we would build a beautiful relationship based on mutual respect and love. The gesture was perfectly calculated to appeal to my Irish heritage, my appreciation for quality craftsmanship, and my emotional attachment to family traditions and symbols. But what impressed me most about Amanda's gift was not the crystal itself, but the obvious research and planning that had gone into choosing something that would demonstrate her understanding of my values and interests, while also establishing her as someone who paid attention to details and cared about making meaningful connections with family members. But Amanda's honeymoon gift was just the beginning of a comprehensive campaign to establish herself as the model daughter-in-law, who not only understood and appreciated our family's values, but who could actually enhance our traditions and relationships through her own contributions and contemporary perspectives. She began attending every family gathering with obvious enthusiasm, arriving early to help with preparations and staying late to assist with cleanup, always expressing genuine gratitude for being included and authentic interest in learning about our family's history and customs. During these early family gatherings, Amanda would position herself near me during conversations, asking thoughtful questions about family stories and traditions, and expressing fascination with the details of our family's immigration history, cultural practices, and community involvement. She would take notes during my stories about our ancestors, and would follow up later with additional questions that demonstrated she had been listening carefully and wanted to understand the deeper significance of our family's experiences and values. Mrs. O'Sullivan, I've been thinking about the story you told about your grandmother's journey from County Cork, Amanda would say during one of our conversations, and I'm curious about how she managed to maintain her faith and cultural traditions while adapting to life in America. It must have taken incredible strength and wisdom to balance honoring her heritage with embracing new opportunities for her children. The questions were intelligent and respectful, demonstrating what appeared to be genuine interest in understanding not just the facts of our family history, but the emotional and cultural significance of our ancestors' experiences and the values they had passed down through generations. Amanda seemed to understand that our family's identity was built on stories, traditions, and shared experiences, rather than just on blood relationships and legal connections. But perhaps most impressive was Amanda's apparent understanding of my role as the family's unofficial historian and cultural keeper. She would specifically seek my input on family traditions, ask for my advice about holiday celebrations and gift-giving customs, and express appreciation for my efforts to maintain the connections and communication that kept our extended family close despite busy schedules and geographical distances. I can see why Daniel speaks about you with such respect and admiration, Amanda had told me during one of our early conversations. You've created something really special here. A family where people genuinely care about each other and want to stay connected despite all the challenges of modern life. I hope I can learn from your example and contribute to maintaining these relationships for the next generation. The comment was particularly effective because it acknowledged my decades of effort to maintain family relationships, while also positioning Amanda as someone who understood the value of that work and wanted to contribute to its continuation rather than challenge or replace it. She was presenting herself as my successor and protege rather than my competitor or replacement. Amanda's approach to family holiday celebrations during her first 2 years of marriage was equally calculated and impressive in its apparent authenticity and genuine enthusiasm. She would arrive at Christmas gatherings with thoughtfully chosen gifts for each family member, always including handwritten notes that referenced previous conversations or shared experiences that demonstrated she had been paying attention to individual interests and needs. For my birthday that first year, Amanda had presented me with a beautiful leather-bound journal, along with a note explaining that she hoped I would use it to record more family stories and memories that could be preserved for future generations. I've been so inspired by the stories you've shared about our family's history, she had written, and I think it would be wonderful if you could write them down so that Daniel's children and grandchildren will always have access to this incredible legacy of strength, faith, and love. The gift was perfect in its demonstration of Amanda's understanding of my values and interests, while also suggesting that she viewed herself as a permanent part of our family's future and was thinking about how to preserve our traditions for coming generations. She was positioning herself as someone who not only appreciated our family's heritage, but who was committed to ensuring its continuation and enhancement. But Amanda's most convincing performance during this honeymoon period was her treatment of Daniel and her apparent commitment to supporting his relationships with family members and maintaining the connections that had been central to his identity and happiness throughout his life. She would encourage him to call his siblings regularly, suggest family activities and gatherings, and express genuine disappointment when work or other obligations prevented them from attending family events. Daniel, I know you've been stressed about work lately, but I think it would be good for you to spend some time with your family this weekend, Amanda would say in conversations that I witnessed during family gatherings. Your mom always has such good perspective on things, and I think talking with her might help you figure out the best approach to the situation you're dealing with. The comment suggested that Amanda not only understood the value of family support and guidance, but that she actively encouraged Daniel to maintain the relationships and seek the advice that had helped him navigate challenges successfully throughout his life. She appeared to be strengthening rather than undermining his connections with family members, and she seemed genuinely committed to supporting the emotional bonds that had always been central to his well-being and security. Amanda's enthusiasm for family traditions and celebrations extended to her apparent interest in learning our traditional recipes and cooking methods. She would ask me to teach her how to make Daniel's favorite Irish soda bread, request my recipes for holiday desserts, and express interest. To understand how Amanda Pierce's eventual public humiliation at my grandson's graduation party would shock our entire family, you need to understand the sophisticated performance she maintained during the first 2 years of her marriage to Daniel. Because the woman who would eventually stand up and announce that I was mentally unreliable had spent 24 months convincing everyone that she was not only the perfect daughter-in-law, but someone who genuinely valued my wisdom, respected my role in the family, and was committed to honoring the traditions and relationships that had held our family together for decades. Amanda's approach to establishing herself within the O'Sullivan family during her newlywed period was nothing short of masterful in its calculation and execution. She had clearly studied our family dynamics during her engagement and had developed a comprehensive strategy for winning the trust and affection of every family member, while simultaneously gathering the information and establishing the credibility that would later allow her to systematically destroy the relationships she was pretending to cherish. The performance began immediately after she and Daniel returned from their honeymoon in Ireland, a destination that Amanda had suggested because she claimed to be fascinated by Irish culture and eager to connect with Daniel's heritage in a meaningful way. The choice of Ireland for their honeymoon had been presented as evidence of Amanda's genuine interest in understanding and honoring our family's cultural background, but I recognized it immediately as a strategic decision designed to establish her credentials as someone who valued family history and traditions. Upon their return, Amanda had presented me with a beautiful Waterford crystal vase that she claimed to have chosen specifically because she, quote, wanted to bring something special back for the woman who raised such an amazing son. The gift was accompanied by a handwritten note expressing her gratitude for welcoming me into your family with such warmth and kindness, and her hope that we would build a beautiful relationship based on mutual respect and love. The gesture was perfectly calculated to appeal to my Irish heritage, my appreciation for quality craftsmanship, and my emotional attachment to family traditions and symbols. But what impressed me most about Amanda's gift was not the crystal itself, but the obvious research and planning that had gone into choosing something that would demonstrate her understanding of my values and interests, while also establishing her as someone who paid attention to details and cared about making meaningful connections with family members. But Amanda's honeymoon gift was just the beginning of a comprehensive campaign to establish herself as the model daughter-in-law, who not only understood and appreciated our family's values, but who could actually enhance our traditions and relationships through her own contributions and contemporary perspectives. She began attending every family gathering with obvious enthusiasm, arriving early to help with preparations and staying late to assist with cleanup, always expressing genuine gratitude for being included and authentic interest in learning about our family's history and customs. During these early family gatherings, Amanda would position herself near me during conversations, asking thoughtful questions about family stories and traditions, and expressing fascination with the details of our family's immigration history, cultural practices, and community involvement. She would take notes during my stories about our ancestors, and would follow up later with additional questions that demonstrated she had been listening carefully and wanted to understand the deeper significance of our family's experiences and values. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, I've been thinking about the story you told about your grandmother's journey from County Cork," Amanda would say during one of our conversations, "and I'm curious about how she managed to maintain her faith and cultural traditions while adapting to life in America. It must have taken incredible strength and wisdom to balance honoring her heritage with embracing new opportunities for her children." The questions were intelligent and respectful, demonstrating what appeared to be genuine interest in understanding not just the facts of our family history, but the emotional and cultural significance of our ancestors' experiences and the values they had passed down through generations. Amanda seemed to understand that our family's identity was built on stories, traditions, and shared experiences, rather than just on blood relationships and legal connections. But perhaps most impressive was Amanda's apparent understanding of my role as the family's unofficial historian and cultural keeper. She would specifically seek my input on family traditions, ask for my advice about holiday celebrations and gift-giving customs, and express appreciation for my efforts to maintain the connections and communication that kept our extended family close despite busy schedules and geographical distances. "I can see why Daniel speaks about you with such respect and admiration," Amanda had told me during one of our early conversations. "You've created something really special here. A family where people genuinely care about each other and want to stay connected despite all the challenges of modern life. I hope I can learn from your example and contribute to maintaining these relationships for the next generation." The comment was particularly effective because it acknowledged my decades of effort to maintain family relationships, while also positioning Amanda as someone who understood the value of that work and wanted to contribute to its continuation rather than challenge or replace it. She was presenting herself as my successor and protege rather than my competitor or replacement. Amanda's approach to family holiday celebrations during her first 2 years of marriage was equally calculated and impressive in its apparent authenticity and genuine enthusiasm. She would arrive at Christmas gatherings with thoughtfully chosen gifts for each family member, always including handwritten notes that referenced previous conversations or shared experiences that demonstrated she had been paying attention to individual interests and needs. For my birthday that first year, Amanda had presented me with a beautiful leather-bound journal, along with a note explaining that she hoped I would use it to record more family stories and memories that could be preserved for future generations. "I've been so inspired by the stories you've shared about our family's history," she had written, "and I think it would be wonderful if you could write them down so that Daniel's children and grandchildren will always have access to this incredible legacy of strength, faith, and love." The gift was perfect in its demonstration of Amanda's understanding of my values and interests, while also suggesting that she viewed herself as a permanent part of our family's future and was thinking about how to preserve our traditions for coming generations. She was positioning herself as someone who not only appreciated our family's heritage, but who was committed to ensuring its continuation and enhancement. But Amanda's most convincing performance during this honeymoon period was her treatment of Daniel and her apparent commitment to supporting his relationships with family members and maintaining the connections that had been central to his identity and happiness throughout his life. She would encourage him to call his siblings regularly, suggest family activities and gatherings, and express genuine disappointment when work or other obligations prevented them from attending family events. "Daniel, I know you've been stressed about work lately, but I think it would be good for you to spend some time with your family this weekend," Amanda would say in conversations that I witnessed during family gatherings. "Your mom always has such good perspective on things, and I think talking with her might help you figure out the best approach to the situation you're dealing with." The comment suggested that Amanda not only understood the value of family support and guidance, but that she actively encouraged Daniel to maintain the relationships and seek the advice that had helped him navigate challenges successfully throughout his life. She appeared to be strengthening rather than undermining his connections with family members, and she seemed genuinely committed to supporting the emotional bonds that had always been central to his well-being and security. Amanda's enthusiasm for family traditions and celebrations extended to her apparent interest in learning our traditional recipes and cooking methods. She would ask me to teach her how to make Daniel's favorite Irish soda bread, request my recipes for holiday desserts, and express interest in learning the techniques for preparing traditional Irish dishes that had been passed down through generations of O'Sullivan women. I want to make sure Daniel can always have the foods that remind him of home and family, Amanda had explained during one of our cooking sessions. These recipes represent so much more than just ingredients and techniques. They're connections to our heritage and expressions of love that have been shared for generations. I want to be able to continue that tradition for our children someday. Quote, the cooking sessions provided opportunities for extended conversations where Amanda would ask questions about family relationships, seek advice about marriage and household management, and express appreciation for the wisdom and experience that I could share with someone who is still learning how to navigate the complexities of family life and adult responsibilities. During these intimate conversations, Amanda would share what appeared to be genuine concerns about her own background and her desire to create the kind of close, supportive family relationships that she claimed to have missed during her childhood in Connecticut. She would describe her parents' focus on career achievement and social advancement as leaving little time for the kind of emotional intimacy and mutual support that characterized the O'Sullivan family culture. I've always envied families like yours, Amanda had confided during one of our baking sessions, where people genuinely enjoy spending time together and where children grow up feeling loved and supported, rather than just pressured to achieve and perform. I want to learn how to create that kind of atmosphere for Daniel and for the children we hope to understand how Amanda Pierce's systematic campaign to destroy my credibility would eventually escalate into the public humiliation she delivered at my grandson's graduation party. You need to understand exactly how she transitioned from the seemingly perfect daughter-in-law into someone whose true character began to emerge through subtle but increasingly obvious signs of manipulation, control, and disrespect. Because the shift was so gradual and carefully managed that most family members didn't recognize the warning signs until it was almost too late to prevent the damage she was planning to inflict. The first cracks in Amanda's perfect facade appeared approximately 18 months after her marriage to Daniel, during what I now recognize as a carefully orchestrated testing phase, where she began experimenting with small challenges to family dynamics and individual relationships to gauge how much resistance she would encounter and how effectively she could manipulate outcomes to serve her strategic goals. The initial red flags were subtle enough that most family members dismissed them as minor personality differences or the natural adjustment process that occurs when someone new joins an established family culture. But my professional experience with deceptive patients and my growing documentation of Amanda's behavior allowed me to recognize these incidents as the beginning of a systematic campaign to reshape our family dynamics according to her own preferences and long-term objectives. The first significant incident occurred during our traditional St. Patrick's Day celebration in March 2017, when Amanda made what appeared to be a casual suggestion about updating our approach to the holiday celebration to make it more inclusive and contemporary for family members who might not share our Irish heritage or traditional Catholic values. I've been thinking about how we could make our St. Patrick's Day celebration even more special, Amanda had announced during the planning discussion. And I wonder if we might consider incorporating some broader cultural elements that would help everyone feel more connected to the celebration, regardless of their specific background or religious beliefs. Quote, the suggestion was framed as a helpful improvement designed to enhance everyone's enjoyment and participation, but I recognized immediately that Amanda was testing the family's willingness to abandon traditional cultural practices in favor of more generic, socially acceptable alternatives that would better align with her vision of contemporary family celebrations. When I expressed concern about maintaining the cultural and religious significance of our traditional celebration, Amanda's response revealed the first glimpse of the condescending attitude that would later characterize her systematic campaign to undermine my influence and credibility within the family. Mrs. O'Sullivan, I completely understand your attachment to traditional approaches, Amanda had replied in a tone that was polite but subtly dismissive. But I think it's important to consider whether our current approach might be excluding or alienating family members who don't share the same cultural background or religious beliefs. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is adapt our traditions to ensure that everyone feels welcome and included. The phrase attachment to traditional approaches was particularly revealing because it suggested that my commitment to preserving our family's cultural heritage was an emotional weakness rather than a thoughtful decision based on values and principles. Amanda was positioning herself as the rational, contemporary voice of inclusion, while implying that my perspective was outdated and potentially harmful to family harmony. But perhaps more significantly, Amanda's response demonstrated her willingness to use emotional manipulation and guilt to advance her agenda. By suggesting that maintaining our traditional celebration might be excluding or alienating family members, she was creating a false choice between preserving our heritage and demonstrating love for our family, when in reality, our cultural traditions had always been inclusive and welcoming to anyone who wanted to participate and learn. The family's response to Amanda's suggestion was politely lukewarm, with most members expressing appreciation for her concern, while also indicating their preference for maintaining the traditional elements that had made our St. Patrick's Day celebrations meaningful and special for decades. But Amanda's reaction to this gentle rejection was my first clear indication that her apparent respect for family decision-making processes had been a performance rather than a genuine commitment to collaborative relationships. Instead of graciously accepting the family's preference, Amanda began a subtle campaign to undermine the traditional celebration by expressing concerns about various aspects of our planned activities. She worried that our traditional Irish music might be too loud for elderly family members. She questioned whether our traditional foods might be too heavy for people with dietary restrictions. She suggested that our traditional decorations might be too specifically Catholic for family members who weren't religious. Each concern was presented as caring consideration for family members' comfort and well-being, but the cumulative effect was to create doubt and anxiety about whether our traditional celebration was actually appropriate or thoughtful. Amanda was systematically undermining confidence in our established practices, while positioning herself as the family member who was most concerned about everyone's happiness and inclusion. But the most troubling aspect of Amanda's St. Patrick's Day campaign was her systematic effort to recruit family members to support her position by approaching them individually with customized arguments designed to exploit their specific concerns and insecurities. She would express worry to my daughter Sarah about whether the traditional celebration might be too much work for me to handle at my age. She would suggest to my son Michael that the traditional approach might seem outdated to his teenage children. She would imply to Daniel that maintaining traditional practices might prevent the family from growing and evolving with changing times. The individual conversations were carefully crafted to make each family member feel that supporting Amanda's suggestions would demonstrate their care for other family members' welfare, while opposing her ideas would suggest insensitivity or selfishness. She was creating a dynamic where family members felt pressured to choose between supporting me and supporting what appeared to be reasonable concerns about inclusion and modernization. This divide-and-conquer strategy was my first clear indication that Amanda's approach to family relationships was fundamentally manipulative and strategic, rather than genuine and collaborative. Instead of participating in open family discussions, where different perspectives could be shared and considered collectively, she was conducting private lobbying campaigns designed to control outcomes by managing individual family members' opinions and responses. The St. Patrick's Day incident was ultimately resolved in favor of maintaining our traditional celebration, but Amanda's behavior during the controversy established a pattern that would be repeated with increasing frequency and intensity over the following months. She would identify aspects of our family culture that she wanted to change, present her suggestions as improvements designed to benefit everyone, and then launch systematic campaigns to undermine confidence in existing practices while building support for her alternatives. The second major red flag appeared during our planning for Daniel's birthday celebration in April 2017, when Amanda proposed that we abandon our traditional family dinner approach in favor of a more sophisticated restaurant celebration that would be, quote, easier for everyone and more appropriate for adult birthday celebrations. "I've been thinking about Daniel's birthday," Amanda had announced during a family phone call, "and I wonder if we might try something different this year. Instead of having everyone cook and bring dishes to someone's house, what if we celebrated at that lovely new restaurant downtown? It would be so much easier for everyone, and I think Daniel would really appreciate having a more adult contemporary celebration this year." The suggestion was presented as consideration for family members' convenience and Daniel's preferences, But I recognized immediately that Amanda was testing the family's willingness to abandon another traditional practice that had been central to our family culture for decades. Our family birthday celebrations had always been intimate, home-based gatherings, where the focus was on personal connection, shared meals, and the creation of memories rather than on impressive settings or sophisticated presentations. But Amanda's proposal revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of, or deliberate disregard for, the values that made our family celebrations meaningful and special. She was suggesting that we replace genuine intimacy and personal investment with the kind of formal, impersonal celebration that would be more impressive to outside observers but less emotionally satisfying for family participants. When I expressed concern about losing the personal, intimate character of our traditional birthday celebrations, Amanda's response was more directly condescending than her previous attempts at manipulation, suggesting that her confidence in her ability to control family decisions was growing. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, I think you might be surprised by how much more relaxing and enjoyable it could be to celebrate without all the stress and work of coordinating a big family dinner," Amanda had replied with barely concealed impatience. "Sometimes I think we get so attached to doing things the way we've always done them, that we miss opportunities to create even better experiences for everyone involved." The phrase, "attached to doing things the way we've always done them," was a direct attack on the value of tradition and continuity in family relationships, suggesting that my commitment to preserving meaningful practices was evidence of inflexibility and resistance to improvement, rather than wisdom and experience. Amanda was positioning herself as the progressive voice of positive change, while characterizing my perspective as stubborn adherence to outdated methods. But perhaps more concerning was Amanda's assumption that she understood what would be more relaxing and enjoyable for family members, better than people who had been participating in and enjoying our traditional celebrations for decades. She was demonstrating the kind of arrogance and presumption that suggested she viewed herself as more qualified to make decisions about our family culture than the people who had actually created and maintained that culture over time. The family's response to Amanda's restaurant proposal was more obviously negative than their reaction to her St. Patrick's Day suggestions, with multiple family members expressing clear preference for maintaining our traditional home-based celebration. But Amanda's reaction to this more direct rejection was my first glimpse of the anger and resentment that lay beneath her carefully constructed facade of concern and consideration. Instead of graciously accepting the family's decision, Amanda began making subtle comments about how disappointing it was that the family seemed resistant to trying new things, and how unfortunate it was that some family members were holding everyone back from experiencing more sophisticated approaches to celebration and relationship building. The comments were never direct enough to provoke open conflict, but they were obviously designed to create guilt and doubt among family members who had opposed her suggestions. Amanda was punishing the family for rejecting her ideas by implying that we were narrow-minded, inflexible, and responsible for preventing positive changes that would benefit everyone. But the most revealing aspect of Amanda's response to the birthday celebration controversy was her systematic effort to convince Daniel that the family's rejection of her suggestion was actually evidence of disrespect for his preferences and happiness. She began expressing, quote, concern that his family didn't seem interested in creating the kind of special adult celebration that he deserved for his birthday. "Daniel, I'm a little worried that your family doesn't seem to understand how important this birthday is to you," Amanda had confided during a conversation that I overheard while visiting their home. "I just thought it would be nice to do something really special and sophisticated for once, but it seems like they're more comfortable with the same old routine than with celebrating you in a way that reflects who you are as an adult." The manipulation was sophisticated and cruel, transforming the family's desire to maintain meaningful traditions into evidence of disregard for Daniel's individual importance and happiness. Amanda was using Daniel's love for his family against him, creating artificial conflict between his loyalty to family traditions and his desire to please his wife and demonstrate his independence as an adult. This pattern of using emotional manipulation to create artificial conflicts between family loyalty and marital harmony would become one of Amanda's primary strategies for isolating Daniel from his family relationships and increasing his dependence on her approval and guidance. She would systematically reinterpret family decisions and behaviors as evidence of disrespect or lack of care for Daniel's welfare, forcing him to choose between defending his family and supporting his wife's feelings and preferences. The third significant red flag appeared during our planning for the annual family vacation in summer 2017, when Amanda proposed that we abandon our traditional cabin rental approach in favor of separate hotel accommodations that would give each family unit more privacy and independence during the vacation. "I've been thinking about our family vacation," Amanda had announced during a family meeting, "and I wonder if we might consider trying a different approach this year. Instead of everyone staying in the same cabin, what if we got rooms at a nice resort where each family could have their own space and privacy? It might be more comfortable for everyone, especially with all the different ages and schedules we're trying to coordinate." The suggestion was presented as practical consideration for everyone's comfort and convenience, but I recognized immediately that Amanda was attempting to eliminate another opportunity for extended family bonding and intimate relationship building. Our traditional cabin vacations had been designed specifically to create opportunities for unstructured family time, shared meals, and the kind of spontaneous interactions that strengthened relationships and created lasting memories. Amanda's hotel proposal would transform our family vacation from a genuine family experience into a series of parallel individual vacations, where family members would interact primarily during scheduled activities rather than throughout the natural rhythms of daily life. She was suggesting that we replace authentic family intimacy with the kind of formal, limited interaction that would be more convenient for someone who viewed family relationships as obligations to be managed rather than connections to be cherished. When I expressed concern about losing the intimate, collaborative character of our traditional family vacations, Amanda's response revealed increasing impatience with my opposition to her modernization suggestions and growing confidence in her ability to characterize my perspective as problematic and outdated. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, I think you might be underestimating how much more everyone would enjoy the vacation if they had some personal space and privacy," Amanda had replied with obvious irritation. "Not everyone enjoys being together constantly for an entire week, and I think some family members might actually appreciate having the option to spend quiet time with their immediate family unit, rather than always being part of a large group." The response was Amanda's most direct challenge to my understanding of family dynamics and relationships to date, suggesting that my belief in the value of extended family time was actually inconsistent with what family members really wanted and needed. She was implying that I was forcing unwanted togetherness on family members who would be happier with more separation and independence. But perhaps more significantly, Amanda's response revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between personal space and family isolation. Our traditional cabin vacations had always included opportunities for individual and nuclear family time, while also creating space for extended family bonding and relationship building. The intimacy and closeness that Amanda characterized as problematic constant togetherness was actually the foundation for the family relationships that provided emotional support, practical assistance, and genuine joy for all family members. Amanda's hotel proposal would eliminate the informal interactions and spontaneous conversations that were often the most meaningful and memorable aspects of our family vacations, replacing them with scheduled activities and formal gatherings that would feel more like business meetings than family celebrations. The family's response to Amanda's vacation proposal was the most uniformly negative reaction she had received to any of her suggestions, with family members expressing clear preference for maintaining the traditional cabin approach that had created so many positive memories and strengthened family relationships over the years. But Amanda's reaction to this decisive rejection was my first clear indication that her patience with family resistance to her ideas was wearing thin, and that her future approaches would likely be more aggressive and manipulative. Instead of accepting the family's decision gracefully, Amanda began expressing, quote, disappointment that the family seemed unwilling to consider new approaches and resistant to change in ways that might improve everyone's experience and, quote, create better memories for future generations. But more troubling was Amanda's systematic effort to convince individual family members that the rejection of her suggestion was evidence of my excessive influence over family decisions and my unwillingness to consider other people's preferences and needs. She began making subtle comments about how unfortunate it was that one person's opinion seemed to carry so much weight in family discussions, and how limiting it might be for the family to always defer to traditional approaches rather than exploring contemporary alternatives. The comments were carefully designed to plant seeds of doubt about my role in family decision-making, and to suggest that my influence was actually preventing positive changes that would benefit everyone. Amanda was beginning her systematic campaign to undermine my credibility and authority within the family by characterizing my commitment to preserving successful family practices as controlling behavior that was harmful to family growth and individual happiness. But perhaps the most significant aspect of the vacation controversy was Amanda's decision to begin documenting and sharing her version of family interactions and decisions with outside friends and family members. I learned through casual conversation with my neighbor that Amanda had been describing our family as very traditional and resistant to change, in ways that suggested she viewed our family culture as problematic and limiting rather than valuable and meaningful. This was my first indication that Amanda was beginning to build external support for her perspective on our family dynamics and was preparing to use outside pressure and validation to advance her agenda for family modernization. She was creating a narrative that portrayed her as the reasonable, contemporary voice of positive change, being unfairly opposed by family members who were too attached to outdated practices to recognize opportunities for improvement. The pattern that emerged from these three major incidents was clear and troubling. Amanda was systematically testing family boundaries and resistance levels while building support for her vision of family modernization and her role as the family's contemporary voice of reason and progress. Each suggestion was designed to eliminate traditional practices that created intimacy and mutual dependence, while replacing them with more formal, impersonal alternatives that would give her greater control over family interactions and dynamics. But equally concerning was Amanda's increasingly obvious resentment of my role in family decision-making, and her growing willingness to characterize my influence as problematic and limiting rather than valuable and stabilizing. She was beginning to position herself as the family member who understood what everyone really needed and wanted, while portraying me as someone whose perspective was outdated and potentially harmful to family happiness and individual growth. The gradual shift in Amanda's behavior during this period was carefully managed to avoid creating obvious conflict or provoking direct confrontation, but the cumulative effect was to establish doubt about traditional family practices, while building support for Amanda's alternatives. She was conducting a sophisticated campaign of psychological manipulation designed to reshape family dynamics according to her preferences, while making it difficult for family members to recognize or resist her influence. But what Amanda didn't understand during this testing phase was that her systematic challenges to family traditions and her subtle undermining of my authority were being carefully documented and analyzed by someone who possessed the professional skills and investigative experience necessary to recognize manipulation and build comprehensive cases against people who threatened family welfare and individual security. While Amanda was busy testing family boundaries and building support for her modernization agenda, I was documenting every incident, every manipulation, and every strategic move she made in her campaign to reshape our family culture according to her own preferences and social advancement goals. The gradual shift had been Amanda's way of preparing the family for more aggressive challenges to our traditional relationships and practices, but it had also been my opportunity to build the comprehensive documentation that would eventually be used to expose her true character and restore family harmony and authentic relationships. The testing phase was about to end, and Amanda Pierce was going to discover that the grandmother she thought she was successfully manipulating and marginalizing had been building a case against her that would be more devastating and comprehensive than she could have ever imagined. The truth was coming to the O'Sullivan family, and Amanda's carefully managed campaign of family destruction was about to backfire in the most spectacular and humiliating way possible. The evening of June 15, 2023, started like any other O'Sullivan family gathering, with no indication that by midnight, Amanda Pierce would be completely destroyed, her 8-year campaign of lies exposed, and every carefully constructed deception she had built her marriage upon would be revealed in the most devastating family scandal in 3 generations of O'Sullivan history. My grandson Tommy's college graduation party was being held at Daniel and Amanda's house. a decision that Amanda had insisted upon as part of her ongoing campaign to establish herself as the family's social coordinator and demonstrate her sophisticated approach to entertaining important family milestones. She had spent weeks planning what she clearly intended to be a definitive statement about the family's evolution under her leadership, complete with professional catering, elegant decorations, and a carefully curated guest list that would showcase her organizational skills and contemporary vision for family celebrations. The guest list for Amanda's graduation extravaganza included not just immediate family members but also several of Daniel's work colleagues, Amanda's sister and her husband from Connecticut, and even some neighbors who Amanda had cultivated as part of her social advancement strategy within the Millfield community. The expanded guest list was clearly designed to create an audience for Amanda's performance as the sophisticated hostess who had successfully modernized the O'Sullivan family's approach to traditional celebrations. I arrived at 6:30 in the evening, wearing my simple navy blue dress and carrying a homemade apple pie in one of my glass pie plates, the same humble approach to family gatherings that had characterized my participation in O'Sullivan celebrations for decades. But what the other guests couldn't see was that I had spent the previous week making a careful decision about how to respond to Amanda's escalating disrespect and her systematic campaign to discredit me within our family and broader community. The tipping point had come 3 days earlier, when Amanda had called me to discuss the graduation party arrangements and had made what she clearly intended to be a definitive statement about my future role in family gatherings and my diminishing credibility as a source of family guidance and wisdom. "Maggie, I want to talk to you about Tommy's graduation party," Amanda had said in the carefully controlled voice she used when she was trying to sound diplomatic, while actually being controlling and dismissive. "I think it would be best if you understood that we're trying to create a more sophisticated atmosphere for this celebration, and I need you to be mindful of not overwhelming our guests with too many personal stories or confusing details that might make people uncomfortable." The phrase "confusing details" was particularly insulting because it suggested that my natural way of sharing family history and connecting with people was evidence of mental decline, rather than the caring, knowledgeable approach that had been central to our family culture for decades. Amanda was essentially telling me that my participation in family gatherings was becoming an embarrassment that needed to be managed and controlled. But Amanda's most devastating comment had come at the end of our conversation, when she had made what she clearly intended to be a definitive statement about my mental condition and the family's response to my supposed cognitive decline. "I hope you understand that families today have different approaches to managing elderly relatives who are experiencing memory issues," Amanda had said with false gentleness that barely concealed her satisfaction at finally being able to deliver this message directly. "Everyone loves you very much, but we need to be realistic about your limitations and make sure that your confusion doesn't create uncomfortable situations for other people or embarrass the family during important occasions." The phrase "managing elderly relatives who are experiencing memory issues" was the moment when I realized that Amanda's 8-year campaign to discredit me had reached the point where she felt confident enough to explicitly state that I was mentally incompetent and needed to be controlled and managed like a problematic child rather than respected as a contributing family member. That conversation had been the final straw that convinced me that protecting Amanda's reputation and maintaining family harmony were no longer worth the personal cost of allowing her to destroy my credibility and poison the relationships I had spent decades building and maintaining. I had spent 8 years keeping detailed documentation of her lies and manipulations while waiting for the right moment to expose her true character, and Amanda's demand that I accept being managed as a confused elderly relative had finally provided the justification I needed to stop protecting someone who had systematically demonstrated that she had no respect for me or appreciation for my contributions to the family. The decision to expose Amanda's lies and destroy her carefully constructed facade hadn't been made lightly or impulsively. I had spent 3 days considering the consequences of my actions and planning the most effective approach for ensuring that Amanda faced appropriate consequences for her behavior, while also protecting the family members who would be affected by the revelations about her systematic campaign of deception and manipulation. I had decided that the most effective approach would be to wait for Amanda to publicly demonstrate her disrespect and controlling behavior in front of the expanded group of guests she had invited to witness her performance as the family's sophisticated new leader. When she inevitably revealed her true character through her treatment of me, I would respond with strategic revelations that would expose her lies and destroy her credibility in the most public and devastating way possible. The early evening reception proceeded exactly as Amanda had planned, with guests arriving to find an elegantly appointed living room, professional catering, and Amanda positioned as the gracious hostess who had successfully created a sophisticated family celebration that reflected her contemporary approach to honoring important family milestones. She moved through the crowd with obvious satisfaction, making sure that everyone appreciated the elegant atmosphere she had created and the modern sensibilities she had brought to traditional family gatherings. But I could see immediately that Amanda's formal approach to the evening was creating the same kind of artificial atmosphere that had characterized her previous attempts to impose sophisticated structure on family events. Instead of the warm, intimate conversations that had always characterized O'Sullivan family gatherings, the reception featured the kind of polite small talk and surface-level interactions that suggested people were performing their roles rather than genuinely connecting with each other. The most telling moment came when one of Daniel's work colleagues asked about our family traditions and history, creating exactly the kind of opportunity for storytelling and family connection that had always been central to our celebrations. But when I began to share some of the family stories that Tommy had always loved hearing about his great-grandparents' immigration experience and the challenges they had overcome to build a successful life in America, Amanda quickly intervened to redirect the conversation toward more contemporary topics. "That's a lovely story, Maggie," Amanda said in the patronizing tone she had perfected over the past 3 years, "but I think our guests might be more interested in hearing about Tommy's future plans and achievements rather than dwelling on old family history that might not be entirely accurate anymore." The phrase "might not be entirely accurate anymore" was Amanda's most direct public challenge to my mental competency to date, suggesting in front of a room full of guests that my memory and storytelling ability had become unreliable, and that family members could no longer trust my accounts of family history and experiences. She was publicly positioning herself as the family member who needed to protect guests from my confused and potentially embarrassing contributions to family conversations. But Amanda's interruption also provided exactly the kind of public demonstration of her disrespect that I had been waiting for. In front of a room full of family members and guests, she had revealed her true attitude toward me and her belief that she had the authority to control my participation in family conversations and determine which family stories were appropriate to share with visitors. The immediate response from longtime family friends was uncomfortable silence and obvious confusion about Amanda's rude treatment of an elderly family member who had been nothing but gracious and welcoming throughout the evening. Even guests who didn't know our family dynamics well enough to understand the full significance of Amanda's behavior could recognize that something inappropriate and uncomfortable had just occurred. But Amanda's mistake wasn't just the public display of disrespect. It was her complete failure to understand that she had just given me permission to stop protecting her and everyone else from the consequences of their own behavior. By publicly characterizing my contributions to family conversations as unreliable and potentially embarrassing, Amanda had released me from any obligation to continue maintaining the family secrets that had kept everyone safe from the consequences of their own actions and decisions. The formal dinner itself was a masterpiece of Amanda's approach to family entertaining. Beautifully presented, professionally served, and completely lacking in the warmth and genuine connection that had always characterized O'Sullivan family celebrations. The expanded guest list and formal atmosphere had transformed our traditional family gathering into a social performance where everyone was more focused on making good impressions than on actually celebrating Tommy's achievement and enjoying each other's company. But the most revealing aspect of Amanda's dinner party was her obvious frustration with family members who continued to treat me with the respect and affection that had always characterized our relationships. Despite her attempts to marginalize me and establish herself as the family's center of attention, family members naturally gravitated toward me for conversation and continued to seek my input on family matters and personal concerns. The breaking point came during the main course, when Tommy himself sought my advice about a difficult decision he was facing regarding graduate school options and career planning. Tommy had always had a special relationship with me, and he naturally turned to me for guidance about important life decisions because he valued my perspective and trusted my judgment about his future. "Grandma Maggie, I've been thinking about what you said last month regarding choosing graduate programs based on personal fit rather than just rankings, Tommy said, turning to me with the kind of genuine respect and affection that had always characterized our relationship. I was wondering if you had any additional thoughts about how to evaluate programs that might help me make the best decision for my long-term goals. I was just beginning to respond to Tommy's thoughtful question when Amanda made the decision that would destroy her life and expose every lie she had been telling about my mental condition and family role. Standing up from her position at the head of the table, she addressed me with a level of condescension and public humiliation that shocked even the guests who didn't understand our family dynamics. Maggie, I think this would be a good time for you to understand that everyone is concerned about your memory issues and confusion, Amanda announced in a voice that carried clearly throughout the dining room. Tommy doesn't need advice from someone who gets confused about details and sometimes makes up stories. It's time for you to accept that you're not the person you used to be, and the family needs to make decisions without your input. The phrase makes up stories was Amanda's most direct and public attack on my credibility and mental competency, delivered in front of 50 family members and guests, as a definitive statement about my supposed cognitive decline and unreliability as a source of family guidance. She was attempting to publicly establish her authority as the family's decision-maker while humiliating me in the most cruel and devastating way possible. The immediate response from the family was shock and horror at Amanda's public display of cruelty toward an elderly family member who had been nothing but kind and supportive throughout the evening. The artificial conversation that had characterized the evening stopped completely as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. Even Amanda's invited guests looked uncomfortable with her obvious cruelty toward someone who was clearly beloved by the family and respected by the community. But Amanda's mistake wasn't just the public display of cruelty. It was her complete failure to understand that she had just given me permission to stop protecting her and everyone else from the consequences of their own behavior. By publicly demanding that I accept being dismissed and marginalized based on false claims about my mental condition, Amanda had released me from any obligation to continue maintaining the discretion and loyalty that had kept her secrets safe for 8 years. I stood up slowly from my place at the table, maintaining the dignified composure that had served me well for 74 years, and looked directly at Amanda with the kind of calm certainty that comes from absolute moral authority and comprehensive knowledge of the truth. Well, Amanda, I said in a voice that was quiet but carried clearly throughout the now silent dining room, if you really think I'm confused and unreliable, perhaps I should start by sharing some of the very clear and accurate records I've been keeping about your behavior and character for the past 8 years. Quote. The color drained from Amanda's face as she realized that I was about to expose the lies and manipulations she had been using to build her case against my mental competency. Her carefully constructed facade of concern and authority was about to crumble, and she knew it. What are you talking about? Amanda stammered, but her voice betrayed her panic and guilt. Everyone in the room could see that I had struck a nerve, and that Amanda's shocked reaction confirmed that there were indeed serious issues with her version of events and family dynamics. I'm talking about the detailed documentation I've maintained regarding your systematic campaign to isolate Daniel from his family, your lies about my mental condition, and your manipulation of family members to serve your own social advancement goals, I continued, my voice remaining calm and factual. I'm talking about the comprehensive records I've kept of every lie you've told, every manipulation you've orchestrated, and every cruel scheme you've used to destroy the relationships that have held this family together for decades. The revelation that I had been systematically documenting Amanda's behavior for 8 years sent shockwaves through the assembled guests, as they realized that the confused elderly woman they thought they were witnessing had actually been conducting a sophisticated investigation of family deception and manipulation. Amanda's narrative about my cognitive decline was being revealed as a complete fabrication designed to discredit someone who possessed damaging information about her true character. But Amanda's lies about my mental condition were just the beginning of what I was prepared to reveal. I had spent 8 years building a comprehensive case against someone who had systematically abused the trust and love of a family that had welcomed her unconditionally, and I had decided that the most devastating strategy would be to create a cascade of revelations that would expose the full scope of her deception and cruelty. But if we're going to discuss family honesty and mental clarity, I continued, retrieving a manila folder from my handbag that contained 8 years of carefully organized documentation, perhaps we should start with Amanda's lies about her previous marriage to Robert Chen in Hartford, Connecticut, which ended in divorce in 2014 when she discovered his affair with her best friend Sarah Martinez. Quote, "The revelation of Amanda's hidden divorce sent shockwaves through the assembled guests, as they realized that the woman they thought they knew had been lying about something as fundamental as her relationship history." Daniel's face went white as he processed the information about his wife's deception, understanding immediately that their entire relationship had been built on lies and manipulation, rather than the honest, authentic connection he had believed they shared. "Amanda, is this true?" Daniel demanded, his voice shaking with anger and betrayal. But Amanda's inability to deny the accusation confirmed that I had exposed a devastating family secret that revealed the depth of her willingness to deceive people who trusted and loved her. But Amanda's secret about her hidden divorce was just the beginning of the systematic destruction I had planned for 8 years. I had comprehensive documentation of her lies, manipulations, and cruel schemes, and I had decided that the most effective approach would be to reveal the information in a way that would make it impossible for her to deny, explain, or escape the consequences of her behavior. "And while we're discussing honesty in family relationships," I said, opening my folder to reveal photographs, printed emails, and detailed written records, "perhaps we should talk about Amanda's affair with her personal trainer Marcus Rodriguez, which has been ongoing for the past 18 months, and has included meetings at the Millfield Motor Inn every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon while Daniel was at work." The revelation of Amanda's affair was the final piece of information that destroyed any remaining credibility or moral authority she might have possessed. After 8 years of systematically undermining family relationships, while positioning herself as the moral voice of contemporary family values, Amanda had been revealed as someone whose own behavior was far more problematic and deceptive than anyone else's. Daniel stood up from the table and walked toward the door without saying a word, his marriage effectively ended by the revelation of systematic deception and betrayal that had characterized their entire relationship. Amanda's carefully planned dinner party had been transformed into a scene of family destruction, with relationships shattered, secrets exposed, and the carefully constructed facade of family harmony completely demolished. But I wasn't finished with Amanda's destruction. 8 years of systematic emotional abuse and family manipulation deserved more comprehensive consequences than simple exposure, and I had additional documentation that would ensure she faced appropriate accountability for every cruel scheme and manipulative tactic she had used against our family. But perhaps most importantly, I continued, addressing the assembled guests who were witnessing the complete collapse of Amanda's carefully constructed lies, everyone should understand that Amanda's campaign to convince our family that I was experiencing memory issues and cognitive decline was a systematic strategy to isolate me from family decision-making while she established control over family dynamics and resources. I opened my folder to reveal the detailed timeline I had maintained of Amanda's lies about my mental condition, including exact quotes, dates, and witnesses to her systematic campaign of character assassination. The documentation was so comprehensive and well-organized that there could be no doubt about the deliberate and calculated nature of her deception. For the past 3 years, Amanda has been telling family members that I repeat stories, get confused about details, and sometimes make things up, I continued, reading from my carefully maintained records. But as you can all see from my documentation tonight, my memory and analytical abilities are not only intact, but superior to someone who thought she could systematically deceive a family without consequences. The contrast between Amanda's claims about my cognitive decline and the sophisticated investigation and documentation I had just revealed was so stark that even guests who had never met me before could recognize that Amanda's entire narrative had been a fabrication designed to serve her own strategic goals. But the most devastating aspect of my revelation was the comprehensive nature of the evidence I had accumulated. This wasn't just 1 or 2 incidents of questionable behavior. It was 8 years of systematic documentation that revealed Amanda as someone whose entire approach to family relationships had been manipulative, self-serving, and cruel. The truth is that Amanda Pierce is one of the most calculating and emotionally dangerous people our family has ever encountered, I said, looking directly at her as she sat frozen in shock and horror at the complete destruction of her carefully constructed facade. She has spent 8 years systematically destroying family relationships, manipulating individual family members, and lying about my mental condition to advance her own social status and control over family dynamics. The immediate aftermath of my systematic revelation of Amanda's lies and manipulations was chaos and devastation. Amanda's carefully planned graduation party had been transformed into a scene of family truth-telling, with deceptions exposed, relationships revealed in their true light, and the carefully constructed facade of contemporary family harmony completely demolished. Amanda's invited guests made hasty excuses and left as quickly as possible, horrified by the family drama they had been forced to witness and embarrassed by their association with someone whose character had been so thoroughly and publicly destroyed. The neighbors who Amanda had cultivated for social advancement purposes would never again view her as a sophisticated role model or trustworthy community member. But the most satisfying aspect of the evening's revelations was watching Amanda's complete collapse as she realized that her 8 years of systematic family manipulation had created exactly the kind of comprehensive disaster that her image-obsessed approach to relationships had been designed to prevent. "You've destroyed everything," Amanda whispered, her voice shaking with rage and devastation as she finally understood the full scope of what had just happened to her carefully constructed life. "I didn't destroy anything," I replied calmly, gathering my documentation back into its folder. "I simply stopped protecting people from the consequences of their own behavior. You demanded that I accept being dismissed and marginalized based on lies about my mental condition, and I decided that you were right. It was time to stop keeping quiet about the truth." The immediate consequences of the evening's revelations were swift and comprehensive. Daniel filed for divorce within a week, citing Amanda's deception about her previous marriage and her ongoing affair as grounds for ending their relationship. The divorce proceedings revealed additional financial irregularities and deceptions that had been hidden throughout their marriage, including secret credit cards, undisclosed debts, and attempts to access Daniel's retirement accounts without his knowledge. Amanda's affair with Marcus Rodriguez became public knowledge throughout the Millfield community, destroying her reputation within the social circles she had worked so hard to cultivate and eliminating any possibility of her maintaining the sophisticated image she had spent 8 years trying to create. The revelation that her marriage had been built on lies about her previous divorce made it impossible for her to maintain credibility as someone who valued honesty and authentic relationships. Within a month, Amanda had been forced to move out of the house she had shared with Daniel and return to Connecticut, where she now works as a receptionist at a medical clinic, a dramatic fall from the social status and family influence she had spent 8 years trying to achieve. Her dreams of establishing herself as the sophisticated matriarch of a successful New England family had been destroyed by her own arrogance and cruelty. But perhaps the most important consequence of the evening's revelations was the restoration of honest communication and authentic relationships within the O'Sullivan family. By eliminating the lies and manipulations that had been creating tension and preventing genuine connection, the family was able to rebuild relationships based on truth rather than performance and image management. Daniel's recovery from Amanda's psychological manipulation was gradual but complete, as he rediscovered the confidence and independence that had been systematically undermined during 8 years of emotional abuse disguised as marital support. The brother and son who had been withdrawn and defensive during Amanda's campaign of family isolation gradually returned to the outgoing, engaged family member he had always been. Tommy's graduation party had been transformed from Amanda's showcase of sophisticated family modernization into a genuine celebration of family love and authentic relationships. The evening that was supposed to demonstrate Amanda's success in reshaping our family according to contemporary standards had instead revealed the importance of honesty, loyalty, and genuine care for each other's welfare. As for me, I returned to my role as the family's emotional anchor and source of wisdom, but with a new understanding of the importance of setting boundaries and demanding respect. The evening had demonstrated that even the most patient and loyal person has limits, and that protecting people from the consequences of their own behavior isn't always the most loving or effective approach. The woman Amanda had tried to discredit and dismiss had taught her the most important lesson of her life. Never underestimate someone based on their appearance, and never assume that kindness and gentleness are signs of weakness or powerlessness. Sometimes the most dangerous person at the dinner table is the one who looks like they couldn't possibly hurt you, and sometimes the most devastating justice comes from simply telling the truth. Amanda had learned that demanding someone accept dismissal and marginalization can have consequences that extend far beyond hurt feelings, especially when that person possesses the kind of comprehensive knowledge and documentation skills that can destroy carefully constructed lives in a single evening. The protection she had taken for granted was gone, and she had discovered exactly what happened when someone pushed the wrong person too far. The O'Sullivan family had been forever changed by the events of that graduation party evening, but the changes ultimately led to stronger, more authentic relationships and a deeper understanding of the importance of honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's welfare. The truth had been painful, but it had also been liberating, and the family was better for having faced it together. Sometimes justice comes not from elaborate schemes or dramatic confrontations, but from simply refusing to protect people from the consequences of their own behavior and choices. Sometimes the most powerful response to systematic cruelty and manipulation is to document everything carefully and then tell the truth with precision and completeness that makes denial impossible. The evening Amanda Pierce learned to never underestimate the power of a woman who had been listening, watching, and remembering everything for 8 years was the beginning of the end of her carefully constructed life, and the beginning of her education about the real consequences of treating people with systematic cruelty and disrespect. The dinner table had been set for justice, and justice had been served with the precision and completeness that only comes from someone who understands that the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. Margaret O'Sullivan had proven that sometimes the most effective revenge is simply being prepared to tell the truth when the right moment finally arrives. The woman who had spent 8 years being systematically underestimated while quietly building the most comprehensive case of documented family deception in 3 generations of O'Sullivan history had reminded everyone why you should never assume that someone's apparent powerlessness reflects their actual capabilities or their willingness to defend themselves when pushed beyond reasonable limits. Amanda Pierce had learned the hard way that some people are far more dangerous than they appear, and that the quiet grandmother knitting in the corner might actually be the person you should fear the most when you've spent years lying about their character and competency. The truth had won, justice had been served, and the O'Sullivan family had been reminded that authentic relationships built on honesty and genuine care are always stronger than manipulative strategies designed to serve individual ambition and social advancement. The evening of Tommy's graduation had become the night that Amanda Pierce discovered what happens when you systematically underestimate and abuse someone who possesses both the skills to document your crimes and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to destroy you completely.